Welcome to this 111th episode for this intuitive public radio. Of course, this is only our numbered episodes. We have a lot of non-numbered episodes that happened previous to our 0 mark in each space. You might have noticed that each space begins with 0. We are enjoying neurological repair courtesy of the Mayan calendar. Blessings to daykeepers. We are in a very interesting position this morning. And we're finding out where we're at. Where are we at? Okay. It is the 4th of June, 2022. 11 Long Good Road, 13091012. We have new resourcing and new opportunities for orienting ourselves in the midst of continued torture. When we talk about ESO experiencing and ESO experiencers, it's not something that we're going to describe readily to others. It's something that we discover as we build relationally with ourselves and our environments and all living beings and one another interpersonally, where there are things that are necessary for us to recognize in order to navigate safely in the environments we find ourselves in. And as it turns out, all or nearly all communities are affected by this, but none of them but us are talking about it. So we're sort of changing our tack. We've been communicating with others as if they could understand us. And that is not happening for some really sensible reasons. It absolutely makes sense. It makes a lot of sense why so many people are not able to respond. And one of the things that we come to through embodiment practice and practicing full respect for all living beings in one's environment is that we're actually in a completely different place than we thought. And the reason that we thought that we were in a very different place is because we were surrounded by false environments, tricking people into thinking that they were leading their lives in a natural, healthy, fully sovereign way. And then discovering all of the layers and layers and layers and layers of how that has actually not been the case. And who recognizes this when it occurs and occurs and occurs, when these patterns repeat in our environments? Who recognizes this? People who are surviving and have survived particular intersections, particular forms of invisibility, particular forms of violence, people who have had to emerge with powerful strengths and skill sets that other living beings would be primed to never recognize. You know, I really miss the feeling of having a shaved head. Have you ever done this? So this is neurologically activating and can be neurologically reparative if you're touching your own hair or your own head. it is not neurologically reparative when someone's touching your hair or your head in a way that you would prefer they not do, and may or may not be able to say that that's how you feel. I've been learning how these neurological ends here can be most protected, things that I really never got the chance to learn in connection with what would be real resonance and community for me, what would be a real sense of a family body. When one is deeply connected to one's ancestry and how one's body grows and how one feels and the things that means. And it means so many different things, and it means totally different things to different beings, and it will mean totally different things to different people in your family and different people who are different kinds of family. We stopped cutting most of the lawn for the Pittsburgh Permaculture Project, and watching the grasses grow out and become the ocean made me feel this really present thing about cutting the lawn is like looking at all of these stumps of living beings, looking at these stumps of limbs poking up out of the ground. And when we stopped mowing, we just cut only what we absolutely had to. Then the rest of the area around where I am became this undulating ocean with the wind breathing over it, dancing with the leaves on the branches and the insects and the animal friends who visit us. And they like it so much. Turkeys just relaxed and reclined in our garden yesterday morning. There were 2 of them, and then they went away. And I thought, oh, well, I guess they went away. And then they came back, they brought their friends with them, and they all foraged in our garden for a while. There is a lot of violence occurring in all of our environments that most communities now, and I should not say most, because we haven't found anyone who can fully hang true in this conversation with us. Our allies are under siege. Our community members are under siege. And we recognize more and more that who we thought were these severely disabled survivors of sex trafficking, oh, well, we sort of have to adjust this. Okay. I'm here. I'm in it. We have to adjust the way that we address this, because known active trafficking organizations, known active human trafficking and sex trafficking organizations prefer a particular technique. And the technique they prefer to employ is that you will be severely disabled, invisibly, in ways you cannot identify, and will resist processing or comprehending. It will happen in a way so that by the time you recognize what's going on, it will be too late. And it may go a very long time before you're willing to recognize that you too seem somehow to be a survivor of sex trafficking. But wait a second. The things that are supposed to happen to people who get sex trafficked have been reported to us in the media, in these particular sensationalized references to sex trafficking. Oh, and they're scary, aren't they? But that didn't happen to me. What do you mean I'm a survivor of sex trafficking? Oh, well, you can go on like that for a while. But if you're not attending daily classes, you won't know what that means. And maybe years or decades later, you will finally hit the particular intersections that would allow you to understand that the whole time, the whole thing was sex trafficking. And so this gives us a sort of a conundrum situation where we need very much to discern where the worst forms of this violence are happening. How are they being held in place? How is it that people are participating in them without understanding what it is they're really doing until it's too late? Now, this is amazing. I wish to nourish my relationship with the local and non-local trafficking organizations by explaining very clearly, right in these moments, what they're doing is absolutely ingenious. What they're doing is so massively effective. I mean, if you really educate yourself at our intersections, if you attend daily classes the way survivors in our network are doing, even though they're being killed in their various locations, which a very, very small number of very amazing people are participating in at this time. They are the first ones over these last, I'm not sure however many years, because my sense of time is pretty wacky. But these people who have joined us are so exceptional, and they're being hurt really badly. Most of them are being targeted in some, there's a diversity of ways. Some of our community members and allies are being targeted personally, or being targeted individually with all kinds of really unfortunate things. If you've spent very much time with us, you might have an idea of what horror stories many of those things can be. Many of our community members are recognizing how we are all being targeted ambiently. All living beings on this planet are experiencing the effects of ambient targeting. It's super important to recognize that that's going on. But it's also really important to recognize what it took these trafficking organizations to do what they're doing. It runs really deep. It is layers and layers and layers of the most subtle, most invisible co-optations that most people, pretty much everyone who hasn't hit their power point through continually being tortured to death over and over again. That's where we find people aware of this, where people have not hit that particular power for themselves, having to emerge because the body somehow found its way into a situation where it can be killed over and over again and wake up over and over again. And what the body experiences when that's happening is very different than people without that experience are able to understand. And so we have to talk to one another from this vantage, but it does not serve us. It does not serve us to be in resistance to these planetary sex trafficking organizations. It's much more effective for us to be in relationship with them because, gosh, they are in relationship with us. There is a lot of intimate invisibility happening now that all of us are having to come to terms with. And if we're in a place where all we can do is fight it, we're causing ourselves and one another a lot of additional unnecessary violence. One thing that is very helpful is to recognize where living beings seek to be in relationship and may not yet know how to be in relationship. And when you look at the patterns of co-optation that have been prolifically embedded, it's so amazing how this has been done, and you will have a tremendous respect for it when you go deep enough to recognize what it's actually doing to your life right now. It's amazing. And it restores a lot of energy. How is that even possible? You just have to actually travel far enough down the logic pathways. And then once you do that, and you recognize the powers that you really have in your body, it's no longer a question about, should traffickers have done this? Should traffickers have done this other thing? Should we put people in jail who do this? It's not that question anymore at all. We are all here together experiencing this. All that which exists, we are part of it. We are living beings, interconnected with living beings. We are all in this contact. Our physiology is the same. My physiology in this body connects through the environmental physiology to your physiology. Do you feel it? Okay. This is 17 minutes. I don't want it to freeze. Okay. Multiple video recordings. Wow. It feels so good to say the things that are in your body that your environments have all been turned against allowing you to say. Wow. You got to do a lot of that in private, because if you do it in public, somebody might not like it. But some of it we can do in public. We're having amazing experiences. And to be quite honest, a lot of those amazing experiences have sort of seemed to be facilitated by trafficking organizations. Now, here's the problem. The problem is, if there are perpetrators themselves entrapped into doing certain kinds of violence in order to get your attention so that you might one day consider the possibility that they too deserve nourishment, belonging, and safety, I mean, just sit with that for a minute. And we get to a place where living beings, having been harmed, having been placed into systems that would require them to behave in certain ways, are shown to be signaling that there's something else that they are striving to communicate. And some of them are conditioned into patterns of addiction that involve extreme forms of violence. And what we find is no community knows how to deal with that except to make it worse, actually. And where we have been listening closely to severely disabled and severely affected survivors of the very most violent, the very most invisible sex trafficking intersections, the only way to navigate these situations is to be most deeply in contact with one's loving nature, no matter how much one is being submitted to brutality and torture. And I do not use those words lightly. If I gave you the fuller details about what I mean when I say those things every single time I referenced them, I don't know how many people would be able to follow our content streams. Well, no, actually I do, because that's what we were doing before. That's what we had to say before from where we were at then. But it's really important to recognize that when you seek to punish a perpetrator, you worsen the environmental effects of those forms of perpetration. You don't improve them. And so as long as we are focused on getting away from danger and focused on violently stopping the danger, we're going to be continually increasing the dangers for all of us. And, oh, this is a scary dialogue because we have some really amazing who's going to get mad at me for saying these things? I'm not sure, actually. We're getting along really well with completely different kinds of people. So the people who get mad, usually they're oh, look, there's Pallas Athene. Hello, Pallas Athene. And Eris. And this beautiful crescent moon, which now is waxing. Is Pluto retrograde? And look, the moon's in Leo. Where did these cards come from? Oh my gosh, this just happened. I'll take a picture of it. I'll include it. I think I can do that. The most severely affected survivors of sex trafficking intersections report consistently that what is in our knowledge base is the only way to actually eliminate these trafficking pathways. There are many people out there who think they can get away with something less than loving the oppressor. But we have psyops now in so many environments that say, oh, how terrible it is that this person is complimenting someone who's done such horrible things. We should hurt them. We should be mean to them. We should make them feel really bad. Shame, 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 shame. We should shame them into compliant. You might really want to think about that one. It's a trick, but it's a good trick. It's such a good trick because what you are being set up to realize, if you can find it, what was that? Was it who said that? Something republic, something democracy, something. If you can keep it, oh wow, that's really something. So the opportunities for metanoic exegesis astonish one completely. We can unpack all of this. We're doing great at it. We are doing it amidst the most extreme, seemingly impossible circumstances. And it's really important that we talk about it. I don't know if this video will get taken down. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. We're going to have a lot of disappearing content moving into the future. We're developing out private platforms. So if you want to be involved in our private classes, if you want to be following our knowledge-based materials being published privately in different spaces led by our survivors groups of this intuitive community network, definitely follow Intuitive Public Radio on Substack. Definitely follow t.me/Intuitive Public Radio on Telegram Messenger. You may, if you are very, very brave, or already in this resonance with us in a way that you are still discovering, wish to follow ESO-EXP, which you will probably see as part of the materials that are added to Intuitive Public Radio for this broadcast. There is a lot of other work being done. There are endless spaces that I could mention. Even if we could count the ones that we had on Telegram, it would still be a number much larger than that. So I will try not to start right now in this context. What I do want to do, and I think we're getting closer to what will be a third video. Should we look at these other cards? Maybe. Ooh, Pluto retrograde. I saw that upside down moon. I turned her upside down. Here we go. She was like that. Oh, our feelings are in very interesting upside down places. Who is under Eris? Energy of the fullest integrity. For realsies. yeah, we've reached some fundamental convergence. And we're here and we can resonate with one another. We have the resources to do this. We don't have to violently exclude living beings from communities. When we recognize how to be truly in most respectful, honorable relationship with one another, we have a completely different dynamic. And one of the things is very important to recognize, and I will keep repeating, is that trafficking operatives and people in leadership roles in violent sex trafficking organizations are entrapped by those systems to continue doing what they're doing, and they will respond fearfully, legitimately, if their safety is threatened. And unless you understand how trafficking organizations function, you will have no idea how actually easy it can be to offer something into the world that gives the most violent trafficking operatives something they need, that puts them in a position where they suddenly realize they no longer are forced to make a living through human trafficking. And if you take this option off the table, that's something that we will have to work with as a community. And communities generally are taking this off the table. So what's very crucial to this discussion is that it is not the individual perpetrators who are keeping the trafficking going. It is the communities. And the traffickers know this. And they feel a legitimate moral authority when communities totally fail to recognize it and are willing to do the same kinds of violence in deeply hypocritical ways to so-called alleviate the trafficking dangers, which of course is not what actually happens, because the communities who alleviate the trafficking dangers are not actually in conversation with the most severely affected survivors of human trafficking violence. And as a result, these communities travel from co-optation to co-optation to co-optation. It's really completely brilliant, and I wish to compliment the traffickers on their implementation of this. It is very well done. I know that you who are traffickers did not choose this. And to bring your strengths to it in a way that plays the game you've been placed in so effectively, it's amazing. This is from whence I am speaking. It's amazing that they are able to do that. It's amazing that you, whoever you are listening, whoever you are, whether you identify yourself as a trafficking perpetrator or not, you are likely, depending on how close in you are to these conversations, you are likely perpetuating trafficking pathways you have no idea of, if you have no idea of them. And if we do not respect the allies with whom we are working, that goes for any and all energy patterns, living beings, living beings and then living beings and then living beings. And there are a lot of kinds of living beings that aren't necessarily recognized as living beings, including traffickers and trafficking survivors. Incidentally, we have so much in common. If you yourself are perpetuating trafficking pathways without a full respect for the infrastructure you're interacting with, for the abuse patterns that have been perpetuated in your environment, if you don't have that respect, you will be enslaved by it. It will get things past you all the time because you haven't quite reached a threshold of being able to ground and connect to the resourcing you already have around you that allows you to understand what's happening. And if you flail and thrash in misunderstanding, it gets really, really bad. Apocalypse bad. Really, really bad. when we are doing our intuitive analysis of trafficking pathways that we find to be active in all community environments, all community environments. All community environments. Oh, it's still difficult for me to say it, but it's backed up. We come back to it every single time. The only way that we're able to operate in our network contexts that we have made safe, or at least as safe as possible for survivors of these intersections, we have to moment be aware of trafficking pathways that can be activated environmentally, and all of us are still influenced by those environments. We are building digital and physical resourcing so that the trafficking pathways can be most completely eliminated. So we go into networks of active human trafficking, active sex trafficking, and we recognize what pathways are there, and we build in our what is basically transitional infrastructure, because every environment has its own emergent way of healing from what's been happening. And our infrastructure facilitates living beings in being able to heal on their own terms, using their own languaging, being put in a position of power to organize their own resourcing. And when we do this, what we track is how this gradually shifts, sometimes very swiftly, very swiftly, can shift the different kinds of violence that are going on in the environment, not in a way that says to this violent thing, I'm going to punch you until you stop being violent. No. Instead, where the violence is emerging, we surround this space with resources and kindness and helpful reminders of previous neurological experiences, where we recognize that all of us really had a lot of touch points where we already knew how things could go most healthfully, most easily, most respectfully, how we could live our lives most honorably. How did we get stuck in all of these patterns where we end up doing this violence? Why do we keep ending up doing this violence? Wait a second, whose idea is that? We just haven't moved through that process as living beings and as a collective organism of living beings. We haven't learned yet how to let the violence stop, because we can let it stop. But this requires at least the transitional infrastructure so that living beings actually have the means of exiting the patterns that are being programmed into them. That includes the trafficking operatives. So when we bring our infrastructure, I mean, natively in our bodies, we carry it in our bodies. And when we go searching for relationships where we can make some progress in these conversations, we are there with our whole body. And now we are there with the network tool sets. We are there with that power of the infrastructure we have built. So much of it is totally invisible. And here's where we get excited about what survivors of the most extremely violent intersections are achieving, because this is very similar actually to the trafficking operatives conversation. These are people who have been really harmed invisibly and forced to find any possible way of using strengths. Many people have found that the only way that they can proceed is to participate in certain kinds of violence. And these severely disabled sex trafficking survivors and those who have come into community with us have been ensuring that we all remember at all times and help one another remember if we seem to forget that there are actually amazing, viable ways to proceed through this without ever perpetuating more violence. And we actually do have access to them. It feels impossible. It feels like that couldn't possibly be the case. But for survivors of these most extreme intersections, literally the only way that they have been able to survive, and I am in this camp in a number of ways, is to recognize that the love energy really can change everything if we anchor specific tool sets and keep using them in our moment-to-moment practice, in our daily classes. We are anchoring with one another. How do we behave most honorably toward all living beings? How do we anchor respect and how to learn respect when one is encountering a living being with very, very different modalities? And often, this is a consequence of the trafficking infrastructure that's been in place all over the planet. Very often, there won't be any way for those in the midst of it to recognize it. And it's sort of interesting how that's okay from this vantage. And the reason that it's sort of okay is that it gives us a really important opportunity to rise to the occasion of courageous collaboration and choose to give one another privileges to create a real kind of community, not a community. Maybe we'll change the way we're talking about this. Not a community where we give one another the privilege of being harmed, but a community where we give one another the privilege of learning to respect one another more effectively. And if we start there, if we start with our relational resourcing, and ensure it is actually relational resourcing, if it's a trafficking methodology disguised as a relational approach, it tends to not work out. And we have a lot of documentation of that sort of thing in the knowledge base. But when we ensure this kind of relational resourcing, everything changes. Wow, a huge number of your problems are being caused by local traffickers, and you probably don't know it if you're not directly in conversation with us. I should point people to some way of signing up for classes. There's more at ESO-EXP. There's more at Intuitive Public Radio. Reach out to me. max@intuitive.pub is my email address. I strongly prefer Telegram messages. Introduce yourself. Don't just say hello, because that's what bots do. And I won't be able to tell the difference. t.me/Max Morris. You can send me a message. I'll introduce you to the network, however is most helpful. So all of this discussion of community co-optations, layers and layers and layers of community co-optation. Like when you look at something that's a totally genius, super complex, amazing, organic, living structure, and it's been created to do certain kinds of violence that would actually require people to wake up to connection and compassion and courage in order to navigate. Wow! And a lot of people have been tricked into thinking that that just speaks for itself and everybody should be left to their own game experience. And wow, is that really violent? So we have wonderful opportunities now where we recognize that none of us truly moves through these initiatory experiences. None of us ascends, if that's what we're talking about, without learning to be fully embodied in our environments with the other living beings who are in relationship with us, whether we know it, whether we believe it, whether we're willing to acknowledge it. We are all in that relationship together. We are a body. All of us are a body. And if all of us are a body, we have very unique decisions that we get to discover and make about how are our parts of the body going to interact with other parts of the body. How are our parts of the body going to communicate and receive communications from the other parts of the body? And so when we look at communities that are affected by this decision point that they haven't recognized yet, not having recognized that decision point is one of the major things that causes severely disabled sex trafficking survivors to not be safe in those environments. And what it means, if severely disabled sex trafficking survivors are not safe in your environments, you, friend, are being trafficked. And so when we work with this set of intersections, we look at all of the different communities that are being trafficked. So I wrote down a lot of them. I don't imagine that it would be all of them. I'm sure that we will mention more, but these are some pretty good broad categories. We have encountered specific trafficking pathways in every space we have examined that is not heavily moment-to-moment prioritizing intuitive tool sets and building and safeguarding and nourishing the infrastructure that is nourishing these communities to somehow be alive in the midst of this, because we're not supposed to be. We're supposed to be dead. I am not supposed to be able to tell you this. Here I am. And one of the interesting things is that, well, it's in the profound benefit of all trafficking operatives I've ever met to have this information out there, because we're not after traffickers. We recognize that our communities are doing the trafficking. Entertainment communities, dating and intimacy communities. Wow. Media broadcast communities. Conspiracy theorist and historical research communities. We put those in the same category. Sovereignty, law, health freedom. We say freedom communities to refer to this particular. There are a lot of different movements that end up falling into that category. Religious and spiritual communities, business marketing and commerce communities, healthcare advocacy communities, social program communities. There are a lot of those. That's very interesting. Disability rights communities, social justice communities, arts and co-creation. I mean, I guess you could say entertainment, arts and co-creation. Arts and co-creation communities, healing and resonance communities, starseed communities affected by this trafficking infrastructure, which no one in those communities is recognizing. We've been looking at this for years, and as a result, we have built disability recovery aid communities, where we do not just use the word disability aid, because what people have been acculturated to take from that, the meaning, is that you're disabled, and so you need an aid, and you have to have this for the rest of your life, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's really too bad. This is not true. Please refer to the social model of disability for some very useful context. All disability aids must be recovery aids. Period. End sentence. And when we prioritize this, we notice our recovery pathways in the midst of the trafficking pathways that all communities are now navigating. All individuals are now influenced by. Wow, okay. We are space jumping this morning. It is 9 hours and 1 minute into this Turtle Island Eastern Time day. If we're counting from midnight, which we don't always. So I just named for you all of these different communities, and you are almost certainly part of some of these communities. I mean, I'm trying to imagine a situation in which you're not. But if you're not, you're either a severely affected sex trafficking survivor, whether or not you know it, or you're participating in certain infrastructural or life pathways that probably allow you to feel at a safe distance from the goings on. And yet, if you're on this planet, you are not at a safe distance from the goings on. You are having all kinds of experiences that are directly connected to the trafficking pathways we've been documenting. So follow intuitive public radio. Pay attention to what our groups are bringing into the conversation. Follow our public Telegram channels so that you can see the notes that survivors groups are taking. You will not know immediately what they mean by what they post, and you will have an opportunity to get deeply into your body and recognize where one or another particular subject, just the barest contact with it, maybe a headline or some text in a link, could be all kinds of things, activate something in your body that really wants to be acknowledged, listened to, really wants to come into a resonance of understanding. And if we are fully present with those activations when we experience them, it gives us an opportunity to come into respectful conversation with survivors of the most extreme kinds of violence that most people think they're dead. We're dead already. We're not supposed to be here. If we're not dead now, we'll be soon, right? Actually, we'll be robots. We won't be dead. Some of us will be dead. Some of us will be robots. Some of us will be torture puppets. Anyway, I can go on about that another time. When you see, you might have felt some things when I said those things just now. That's possible too. What's happening in your body is really important, and your body deserves, you deserve for you to be listening to it. You don't have to push it off. There is resourcing for you to be present with it, and it can be very, very scary. It can be life-ending. It can be world-ending. It can completely change your concept of the material universe in which you're operating. And yet that is how we grow. That is how we change. That is how we learn. And it's painful. A lot of the time it's painful. Sometimes it's wonderful. Sometimes it's absolute bliss. But some of the places our blisses are coming from are pretty deceptive. And it's taken us out of contact with our bodies, with what our bodies are speaking, when we come into relationship with tiny little instances. Here's a tiny little element. Maybe you've been entrained to forget about it. Here's another tiny little element, and your perceptions are an ocean, are a map that your neurology is physically responsive to in emergent, pleomorphic ways. And when you're in a place where you have the opportunity to notice what is called triggers. We can use other words, especially when you're following survivor-led environments. The conversations that are co-created from that place as part of our classes and many other kinds of interactions where these things happen, there's no substitute for them. They cannot be replaced. They cannot even really be faked if you're really down in your body and you're really present in the greater body, fully recognizing what's going on in the greater body. And that's very, very hard for a lot of people. And we at certain sex trafficking intersections have had to learn this because there was no other way to physically survive. It's interesting that my left shoulder blade is itching, like just in this moment. What do we think is the meaning of this itch on my left shoulder blade? I'm doing some heavy lifting this morning. Oh, wow. So we're here and we're doing this together, and you are not only invited, you are also involved rather intimately, whether or not you realize it. That's such an interesting place to be. Okay, cards. What do we find beneath the energy of the fullest integrity? This is what just happened just now. See, look, I don't know who's talking. Somebody thinks they're being funny. Ready? La 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 la. Ha ha, hilarious. No, I didn't know that card was there. Okay, we're communicating. Here we are in the universe. Our angels are attending. You are supported in ways you have no idea. I can count on one hand or two hands, one or two hands, depending on the day and what our core organizers are experiencing, the people who are able to actually show up and be present on a day-to-day basis for these conversations. Most of our community members either are severely disabled by violence in their vicinities. They are not able to join our conversations as often as they would because of the violence that is ongoing and totally unrecognized by their various community spaces. And there are a lot of people who don't realize this resource is here, and they don't realize that it profoundly increases safety and well-being for all of us to come closer in and work on this together. Because this is where living resonance is activated. This is where nourishment lives. This is where our sexual vitality, our life energy, our multi-generational families and safe, inclusive communities, this is where that is. And if you are striving to be in greater contact with it, you must not miss this. It will prolong your struggles if you miss this. And what's happening for people who are not missing it is miraculous. But the reason that it's miraculous is because it's all of us, you and me, and a lot of other living beings discovering emergently in relationship, while community building, while learning from one another, that it is our living bodies which are miraculous. We manifest miraculousness through being in full contact with our real living bodies. Not only the individual body, but the greater bodies that we are all part of. And when you tune to that, there is the source energy, there is the power of connection to that which is most ancient. The path we have all been traveling leads back and back and back to where we were all the same and there was no differentiation. And when we are aware of and staying present in that resonance. The world is very, very different. Our bodies are very, very different. Our options are very, very different. Our stories move through challenges into experiencing, and it is ISO experiencing if we are tuned. That communicates across all time and space when we satisfy our emergent stories, the story portions, the plot points that haven't happened yet, that are there for us to move through on this path we may not have recognized at all. We are co-facilitating this massive transmedia, storytelling, healing, collective experiment. Can we do it? Are we going to be able to come into contact with it? Can we process it while it's going on? Are we in denial about it? Are we resisting it? Are we thrashing in the midst of it? Are we fearful that there's nothing we could possibly learn from it? Do we feel cut off from our God stuff? From the ability to pray or to meditate? Do we realize that there is nourishment for us to find in the silence? And do we realize that we are building the natural, emergent, living infrastructure from our bodies, in our bodies, out of our bodies, between one another, all in the midst of all of our environments, not only physically, but imaginally? You might be sorting new information. You might be sort of starting to get my drift. It's a beautiful set of pathways that we are recognizing, allowing, facilitating, co-creating. A lot of them have to be built, but you know what? A lot of them were there already. If we know how to recognize them together, if we know how to communicate, if we don't allow trafficking infrastructure to devastate our communications functions, this is here. It's here now. So we're going to just keep talking about that. And I'm really grateful for the energy this morning. And I hope you're finding it in the way that you need to find it. And in any case, we will be here doing this.